Hi everyone. In Parshat Korach this week, we read about an attempt at change. A group of people in this week's reading claims to be fighting for justice. The self-proclaimed revolutionaries come to the leaders of their nation and they say, "You have gone too far. For all of the community are holy, all of them, and God is in their midst. Why then do you raise yourselves above God's congregation?" What a compelling rallying cry. Kulam kidoshim uvtocham Adonai. We are all holy and God is among us. Isn't that exactly what we believe? God has told the people, V'atem tihu li mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh. You are a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Every Israelite is holy. Everyone is a priest. So why would Aaron's priesthood be more elite and have more access to God or to worship than anyone else's? Why should Aaron and his sons be intermediaries to God if every Israelite is holy? Those words sound like the words of an oppressed people rallying for justice against an unjust government. We too are worthy. There's a midrash about Korach from the book of Midrash Rabbah that could be read as really supporting this idea that Korach sounds reasonable. The midrash points out that the passage immediately before the story of Korach is about the commandment to wear tzitzit, fringes, on the corner of our talitot. The midrash connects those two accounts. What is written directly before this passage about Korach? Instruct them to make for themselves fringes and to attach to the fringe at each corner a thread of blue. Well, Korach jumped up and asked Moses, if a cloak is entirely blue, what is the law? Should it be exempt from the obligation of fringes? Moses replied, It is still subject to such obligations. Korach retorted, the blueness of a cloak entirely blue cannot free it from the obligation before threads can do so. He went on, if a house is full of Torah scrolls, what is the law? Should it be free from the obligation of having a mezuzah? Moses replied, it is still under the obligation of having a mezuzah. Korach snapped back. The entire Torah cannot exempt a house, but the two sections in a mezuzah exempt it? These things, you have not been commanded concerning them. You're making them up. Despite the seeming justice in Korach's claims, as we soon learn, God does not take kindly to the would-be revolutionaries. The ground swallows some of them up, and the others are consumed in a fire. Is that because God is inherently undemocratic and opposed to criticism or opposition? That seems unlikely. In just a few weeks, we're going to read about the daughters of Tzlofchad, who come to Moses with an objection to a law, and God changes the law. And Jewish tradition in the Talmud holds up the value of respectful disagreement, routinely preserving opinions that never gained traction, but were nevertheless recorded. So why did this particular call to equality meet with such a violent rejection? One answer is you could argue that maybe God overreacted. Maybe God can accept critiques about specific laws, but to suggest that the whole hierarchy, with Moses and Aaron at the top, was autocratic and unjust, was too dramatic of a change for God to be able to take. In that view, maybe the only sin of Korach and his fellow revolutionaries was in trying to change too much, too fast. But before we can say that, we need to explore other options. After all, before we judge a situation, we want to know the context. So what is the context to these requests for equality? Let's get started by looking at the leaders. There are actually two different groups advocating for change here, and we're going to look at them one at a time. First, we have Korah. Korah is introduced to us by his lineage, Korah ben Yitzhar ben Kahat ben Levi. He's the great-grandson of Levi, which means he is in the same tribe as Moses and Aaron. Now that's interesting because the Levites are the priestly tribe. They're going to serve in the Temple of Jerusalem. And all of the Levites have a somewhat elevated religious status in Israelite society, but only Aaron and his descendants are priests making the actual sacrifices in first the tabernacle and then later in the temple. This hierarchy is preserved in many congregations today, where the first aliyah is reserved for priests, descendants of Aaron, and the second is for Levites, i.e., any Levite who is not descended from Aaron. Scholars tell us that historically there may have been a point where all Levites were understood to be priests, and later the multi-tier system that we see today was imposed. So this story could be the reflection of some resentment that some Levites may have had about their intermediate status. With this context in mind, it seems likely that Korah is not actually suggesting that all Israelites be given access to make sacrifices to God. Rather, this story, in context, appears to be that of a person with some power expressing resentment against those with more power. He doesn't want power for everyone, only for himself. And Moses intuits this dynamic, telling the Levites, "Is it not enough for you that the God of Israel has set you apart from the community of Israel and given you access to God to perform the duties of God's tabernacle and to minister to the community and serve them? Now that God has advanced you and your fellow Levites with you, do you seek the priesthood too?" This dynamic is confirmed when Korah and his followers accept the challenge that Moses sets up between them and Aaron and his sons. Each group shows up with fire pans full of incense and waits to see whose offering God will accept. Korah and his followers want to be the ones to offer incense. They don't want it for everyone. A similar dynamic is at play with the other rebellion story in this parsha. Datan and Aviram from the tribe of Reuven rebel against Moses' political authority at the same time that Korah rebels against Aaron's religious authority. Reuven, as the oldest son of Jacob, was expected to be his heir. So it's understandable if Reuben's descendants might harbor resentment when a member of a different tribe assumed political leadership of the Israelite community. Once again, we see a group who has some status asking for more status. And in fact, they don't even offer a new vision for society once they're in charge. In the words of Lin-Manuel Miranda, they don't have a plan, they just hate mine. Datan and Aviram don't want an equal society. They want to be the leaders themselves. So in both cases, what was represented as a democratic struggle for justice may really just be an attempted coup. One group wants the power, and they claim to want power for everyone until they get it. Then they just replace the group in power. It can be disconcerting and upsetting to see insincere governments and movements utilizing otherwise compelling slogans and ideas. In doing so, they deceive, and they also threaten the power of those ideas because they dilute them. Take "drain the swamp." That phrase was originally used to challenge the power of corporate money in Washington, that so-called revolving door between politics and industry. But now it's used to mean get rid of any official who doesn't profess absolute utter loyalty to the particular politician in power. It totally guts the meaning of the original concept. It's not always easy to know the difference between a sincere revolutionary and a power-hungry would-be autocrat. We see this around the world. Sometimes revolutions lead to substantive, lasting improvements, and sometimes hopes are dashed as the new leaders fall into the same corrupt patterns as the previous ones. Sometimes the same slogans are used by both types of group, making it hard to tell who is the real change maker. One of the things that I take away from Korah's story is that a true message can come from anyone. But the identity of the messenger matters. Korah's words ring true. We really are all holy, and God really does dwell with every one of us. But that doesn't mean Korah's motives are pure, or that his plan would lead to a more equal society. The Talmud tells us that there are two types of disagreements, those that are for the sake of heaven, and those that are not for the sake of heaven. What is the prime example of an argument that is not for the sake of heaven? Korah's argument. In other words, it was Korah's intent, his what is for the sake that he was making the argument. That's what was problematic. It wasn't his words that were the problem. The Parsha begins with the words, Vayikach Korah. Korah took. But it doesn't tell us what he took. Rashi fills in the gaps. Rashi says, Korah took words. He took those words and he used them as a weapon. Words matter, and we need to use them honestly. Words can evoke emotion, words can provoke action, words can deceive, and words can destroy. How a person uses words tells us about themselves. It is important to assess both a person's words and also their character and their motives as we determine whether to follow them or, frankly, whether to partner with them. Now, that doesn't mean we can't disagree with leaders or coalition partners about particular issues. I think it's quite valuable when groups that disagree can come together about issues that they have in common. But it does mean that we need to be able to trust that when it comes to the particular issue at hand, we're on the same page. Today, there are a number of movements working for change. Many of those movements aim to create a world which acknowledges the holiness of every person. They have clear visions of what the world can be when they succeed and concrete strategies to get there. Those movements are made of people who sincerely want a better world, not just for themselves, but for everyone else. That is the type of movement worth fighting for. My prayer for us and for our society is that we do come together to create real, meaningful change that truly advances the equality of every person. May we sincerely, without ulterior motives, come together with like-minded people to create a society which truly acts out the message that every person is holy. Ken Yiratzon. May it be God's will.